How's it going? Great. So I'm going to try to do some context. This is about Consensus Building 2.0. I'm going to talk about craziness, and the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the hell off the mic, and I'm going to let people speak that aren't me. That's some things I've learned through years of doing this. As much as I have, I'm proud of the fact that I've A, lost 15 pounds in recent months, B, have fantastic new shoes, and C, despite that fact, no one actually wants to hear from me, even though I'm hilarious and humble at the same time. Okay, so how many of you put up your hand if you have heard about Thoughtexchange before? Yeah, not a few of you. All right, great. So actually, I'm not going to do a blatant product pitch. But what I am going to do is I'm going to try to give you some quick context in about 2 minutes, and then we're going to go into something which I think might challenge your perception of what it means to have an authentic conversation and what it means to be vulnerable with your constituency. It might actually make you go, yeah, that sounds a bit crazy, but why? But so the first thing I want to do is actually run through, if you haven't used the platform before, here's some very pragmatic context. In Thoughtexchange, you do some simple things. You share some thoughts. You ask a question, what can we do to improve our schools? Next, you rate some thoughts, a 5-star rating, whether you agree or disagree. Seems extremely simple, right? And after that, you discover, hey, what's important? What's important to the group? But how it gets used is probably the most important aspect. It's actually not a matter. It's like actually after you hear from thousands of people, you actually get a dashboard to understand what matters to people, but more what brings them together, which is what we're going to talk about with these gentlemen to my right. These are actually some thoughts from their districts. In Menifee, when we're asking about some perspectives we need to consider about safety, people sharing, providing a safe environment to everyone at the school site. Another one over here. At Arcadia, what are we doing well? What are some things for us to consider as we work to ensure our schools are safe, continue to provide a warm, welcoming campus? And the final one here, what are some things we're working well right now in our district? In McAllen, district's doing very well academically and provides a variety of choice for students. Kind of a crazy thing to ask a completely open-ended thought, like, hey, what are your thoughts in general? And also kind of crazy that most of the responses are positive. Isn't that kind of strange? I want to dig into that just for a second, and I'm going to switch over to this, and I'm going to do a rocket version. I just want to show you one thing so the penny drops for you. Most important thing with Thoughtexchange, someone shares a thought, but then everyone else, those little orange line, they actually consider and rate the thoughts of other people. That's the thing that's different with what we do. It's not about you gathering thoughts, it's about your community learning from each other. Okay, it's about them, and they don't agree, right, on a lot of stuff, but it's important that they empathize with each other. I'm going to try to drive this home with what I think is a crazy conversation, which is to ask this of superintendents. We ask this question, what are some perspectives to consider as we work to make our schools safe, right? I just want to drive one point home. Oh yeah, there's lots of things that came to the top, right? Lots of things that came to the top. But you can hear about this creating a safe environment, but I only want to focus on one thing, is that different people rate thoughts differently. We asked this to a group of national superintendents, and we can see instantly that different people rate thoughts differently. And Group A rated these thoughts high. All right, I really want this to settle in for you. Reduce the number of guns on the streets. The majority of teachers do not want to be armed. Creating stiffer gun laws, right? Group B rated these thoughts high. Are you surprised? Anybody? No? All right, here's the unique thing that's important though. You can have a conversation that's a bit tense, right? Talking about guns in America and kids, but here's the thoughts that both groups rated high, regardless of how they rated those previous thoughts. You understand? Universal background checks. Student want to feel safe. Keeping education first. The security of the school building. No student wants to feel devalued. This is common ground. Whether or not you think a teacher should have a gun or not, we're able to say this is the common interest between people who fundamentally don't agree. All right? I just wanted that to be something. We'll switch it maybe back to something that looks pleasant on the other slide. But what I want to do for the rest of the time here is that these three gentlemen to my right have all had a chance to have conversations at various levels. Arcadia has been with us for a number of years. McAllen just started with us a few months ago, and Stephen Menifee started about a year ago. But what I want to do is I want to talk about what it's like to hear back from thousands of people, because if you look at Arcadia here, they have had thousands of people, they're talking about personalized education, they're talking about homework, they're talking about community engagement. whereas Menifee's just starting out, they're talking about safety, they're talking about school improvement in general. All right? So for this panel, what I'd like to do is start by the question I felt I'd drop on them is this. Starting right here and heading across, why were you so crazy to ask your entire community to share their thoughts open-ended about your district?
Well, Dave, those are nice shoes, and I think I found your 15 pounds recently. So why are we crazy enough to do that? Because for us, this is more about culture and a process that we've been involved in for over 10 years in building transparency, communication with our community. And really, Thoughtexchange just became a tool for really extending that transparency outward to gather the most thoughts, the most data that we can find in our community. And we have 9,200 students in Arcadia, 62% Chinese American. Sometimes we struggle in how to access those members of our community. And this has allowed us to really open up what we're thinking about with regards to policy, directions, initiatives of the district, and then to gather many, many thoughts. And I know that routinely in our thought exchanges around our school plans or our district plans, we get over 100,000 interactions in a district with 9,200 kids, over 2,000 people participating. So you think about that, we're representing over 20% of our community in the data gathering piece, which really helps inform our initiatives.
That's great.
And in McAllen, again, my name is Gonzalez. I've been with McAllen for 20 years, and I'm going into my 3rd year as superintendent. So working with the board, as we've been talking about, one of the pieces of feedback I received from them is we wanted to open the channels of communication as we set the plate for a tax ratification election. And not only a tax ratification election, but a tax ratification election that's occurring after a bond recently failed 70-30. And the feedback we got back from the communities when we tried to pass that bond years back is that we didn't communicate with our constituencies. We didn't ask people for their feedback. We didn't tell people what we were going to do should the bond have passed. So in this environment of being transparent and working with the community and getting feedback, I met Dave and I saw this presentation. I was sitting where you're sitting, and I just had an epiphany. I said, that's what we need in McAllen, because Thoughtexchange is going to give us an opportunity to get feedback from everybody. And not only that, but rate that feedback and take action on the feedback that everybody feels important. So that was the big piece of it, sitting where you're sitting and having a specific need, and Thoughtexchange fitting that need perfectly. And we've been very, very happy with its success. Our election's coming up on September 8th. We feel very confident with the feedback that we're getting, and Thoughtexchange is one important variable in getting us to this position.
Thank you, sir. How you, Steve?
Yeah, very well. So I'm Steve Kennedy. I'm a superintendent now. This is my 7th year as superintendent. We've done it in terms of doing the job of a superintendent. There's lots of things that are going to come across your desk. There's a ton of different considerations that you're going to be asked to deal with and to weigh in on. And one of the things that for me was the most important was we needed to develop higher levels of trust throughout the organization, both inside and outside in the community. And nothing will address the notion of trust more quickly than to be able to say, I'm going to ask you a generalized, open-ended question, and I'm going to be completely receptive to whatever responses you get. Now, I can go a little further if you'd like.
You know what, I was going to say, why don't you start and actually go for the details. So you talk about building trust, but it's not a magic thing, by the way. The other thing is that I really want to stay focused on the authentically asking everybody's thoughts and authentically ensuring they learn from each other is the thing we're talking about here. Thoughtexchange is a great way to do that, but really it's the chance to be heard that I think is so important. And Steve, why don't you tell the story of what it's like? It's sort of like some evidence. What happens when people feel heard?
So here's kind of, to kind of boil it all down. One of the things that it did as a byproduct was, you know how you ask anything of anybody and you're going to get, especially a group of people, you're going to get a range of responses. And undoubtedly, you're going to get a few responses that are going to come at you from right field. The folks that, and normally, sometimes they can be the loudest voices in the room. At your board meetings, you know them and you know them well. Well, just because they're loud doesn't mean that represents the majority of the people that are feeling in that manner, right? And so what Thoughtexchange does is they realize through that rating system that, well, my idea isn't getting a lot of stars. So that means my idea is not generating the kind of support, and that naturally gets them to kind of quiet down.
So Steve, give us the pragmatic details of your boundary thing.
All
Run
right,
through
so,
that.
so you know, as superintendents, the quickest way to be not to be a superintendent anymore is to change boundaries, and, right? And so, or do things like get rid of school busing. I'm just saying. So we did a boundary change because our area is growing. We have 10,300 students. Within the next 15 years, we're going to be at 20,000. And they're saying 5 years after that, we're going to be at 34,000. That's massive change for a district that when I got there had just under 6,000 students in it. So anytime you change a boundary, it's all good unless you're impacting my child, right? And so the old system was we'd put together some different maps and some different ideas, and then we'd roll it out to the community. We'd have these community forums, and we'd share things out, and we'd hear back from them, and they'd come in and they would, say all the things that they'd want to say, and then the board would be stuck with trying to make a decision, knowing that they're going to displease a good section of the community. So in the most recent boundary change, we actually did a thought exchange with it. And we asked a very open-ended question about what should be considered as we build new schools and try to achieve balance with regard to enrollment. And all of a sudden we did this massive exchange. We had over, I want to say 8,000 responses or something of that nature. And, but the board was very, very conservative. And they said, but we still want to go out and do that community forum face-to-face. We want to see some folks. So all staff was ready to go. We had it planned out for 3 different sites. Went to the first site on the first night. I had a bunch of staff there because, we wanted people to be able to address questions as they would come up. So we had 0 attendees from the community. Not a single family, not a single parent. So the board member comes to me and they said, so what happened? Did you not publicize this? I said, well, no, we actually did. We did it over and over again, used all the social media and everything else. And then they said, well, this is unusual. And I said, it's probably because we've already done an exchange on this and we'll be reviewing this. Then they said, well, let's do it again next week on the other side of the district. It went next week, other side of the district, again, 0 attendees. So when it came to pass the boundary change that was recommended, got the idea, there was not, you could hear crickets when the board took that action. So here's something that could be very volatile that was made into a much more smooth path. And I think it's because we were open, we wanted people to share their ideas, and we valued the things that they were saying and tried to include those in the plan. There you go.
That's great, thanks. Maybe, Jay, talk to me about the conversation you had, maybe some of the actions that you're doing around safety and that sort of thing. Maybe give some context for that.
Well, one of the things was we wanted to ask staff and community members questions about should the TRE pass, what are some things we should do with that? And then we wanted to ask a second question is, what are we doing well as a district and what can we do better? We asked staff members, parents, and we included students. So one of the common themes that came across that group was safety and security for obvious reasons. So they wanted to make sure that should the TRE pass, that we put resources into securing our buildings and really utilizing resources to make our schools safer. So what we did is we started to talk as a leadership team to say, well, let's not wait for the TRE to pass. Let's take some action now. So what we did is we started to quickly use our resources and we built security foyers in all of our middle schools and high schools. So we have 7 middle schools and we have 3 comprehensive high schools. So they started to see action immediately. And we also hired 19 police officers for our elementary schools. Now, remember, this is before the TRE. The election's coming up September 8th. So what the community is saying is we did this thought exchange. All these concepts rose to the top around safety, and you can see the district taking action. So imagine what will happen once that TRE passes. So we're getting a lot of positive feedback, and a lot of the people that were opposed to the bond are now supporting the TRE. And even those that, just because it says tax ratification election, they're saying I can't support it because it says the word tax. Can you change the name? I said, well, no, we can't change the name. They said, okay, we can't support it, but we're not going to fight against it. But that's a very small percentage of the community. So we feel very, very confident that it's going to be successful. And a big part of that is the information that we were able to gather from Thought Exchange.
That's fantastic. So, and Jeff, maybe talk about, you have a couple, so Arcadia's been with us for quite a few years. You have one of my favorite use cases, the one that you've mentioned. So you passed a tax successfully, right. But actually I don't like to talk about taxes passed because of trust. That's what I believe. I believe taxes passed because of trust. And I don't know, maybe talk about the principal piece, because I think there's some interesting ways to build trust. And maybe that was an interesting one that you led for sure.
Yeah, so we had a really controversial situation happen at one of our elementary schools, and there was some issues of leadership that arose. And in the end, that principal did leave the school. And as we began to dig into that community, we discovered there was a real lack of transparency, a real lack of communication. So we initiated a thought exchange around the qualities that community would love to see in a principal as we moved ahead. And it was super, super valuable because parents, what rose out of that was that parents felt like they had never been listened to, that they had no access to the front office or to the staff, that school was on an emotional and psychological lockdown most of the time. And then we were able to ask in a very qualitative, narrative way, what would define the best qualities for a principal of this elementary school? And I think another question we looked at was sort of 5 years out, how would you like to see this campus look differently? And that gave voice to the parent community, that gave voice to the students and the staff of the school, and that also allowed us to find the right individual who also was then given very clear directions as she moved into that role of what those steps needed to be to begin to change that culture and that environment. So extremely, extremely valuable. We had at the subsequent board meeting a group of parents show up and we thought, oh boy, here we go. And they wanted to stand up and say how valuable the entire process was, how they feel heard, and how the culture of the school has already shifted.
Dave, I love that idea. Can I ask Jeff a question?
Yeah, for sure.
So that's an awesome idea. We're going to implement that in McAllen.
All right.
So the whole deal is, are you doing that with principals only, or is it principals, directors, executive directors, assistant soups? Is that something that you've worked into your process with regard to HR?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jay. I think we're going to work it in.
Okay.
We haven't had another major change yet in the leadership since that time, but we're always looking for authentic ways to engage the community in the searches. One of the other things we've done outside of you guys, Thought Exchange, in the consensus building way is when we have leadership positions open up, before we ever actually get to the final interview, we actually bring all the candidates together in a social gathering, standing in the same room, and have the parents and teachers and staff and leadership actually stand and talk and socialize with the candidates and see how they perform. It opens up a different level of transparency as well.
Fantastic.
So one of the things that I think is absolutely important is that you have to validate the work of your staff. And it takes time to do that, and they have to know that there's some trust in there as well. And so one of the things that we just started doing, and it's been remarkable, is before every management and leadership team meeting, we do a thought exchange. Because I want to know what's happening, what are the hot button issues, and it could be very different at different sites, right? But I wanted to know so that they can help us set the agenda for what we're going to be talking about. And that values their experience. It values what they're struggling with. It values the things that they need, they want to get some more resources about. And so it's a great tool for that.
That's great. So let's dig in, because I think there's something, this is called Consensus Building 2.0, and I think there's some interesting things that to lean into. One is how we're using the internet to get a hold of people, and there's a lot of people that say, you know what, if you want to tell me what you think, you should have the guts to tell me to my face and to have your name put on it. Thought Exchange actually takes the name away. It's the thought. It's an idea meritocracy. No one knows who said what. It's what comes up to the top. And there's there's a bit of a mixture of the conversation of like, well, if people really have something to say, should they hide behind the internet? Or should they just come forth at a board meeting? Should they just tell me what they think? What's happening with the whole change to an internet way of engaging? Is it increasing or decreasing? Or what does that mean to my community? That fair enough, we don't have many people come to our town halls. Fair enough, our board meetings are a little bit painful. But what does that mean to my community that it's thousands of people, but they're using the internet to communicate with me? I'm just sort of curious for a comment on like that evolution of consensus, but using the internet to try to actually create consensus. Anybody have a comment on that?
I'll take that. So, I think similar to what you guys did, Steve, we actually use, so in our community, 62% Chinese American, very high achieving. We just had the proud fact happen that we had 100% of our students graduate from high school this last year.
Yeah,
First time in many years.
Good.
But we got on the subject of homework and grading, and when you get into the Chinese community and let's say the academic achievement, the emphasis on academic achievement, there's an expectation these kids come home with hours and hours of homework every night. And so we didn't know where fact kind of ended and where mythology began. And so we actually used the thought exchange around homework and grading to develop new policy. within the school district. But that was the internet piece, right? But that led us to the community engagement. So we actually brought stakeholders together, and the interest that the Thought Exchange generated in the community brought a great number of people out to the actual engagement. And then we used the results of the Thought Exchange, what emerged, the themes, to actually guide the discussion, and using table groups there to actually do that. So it was a really interesting mix of the social part of the media and the internet.
And it was a leap of faith for me because as we've discussed already as superintendents, we have several bosses. In my case, I have 7, and they all have high expectations. So whenever you put an open-ended question such as, what are we doing well as a district and where do we need to improve? A lot of times I look at the superintendent when all these areas that we need to improve upon. So there is that level of vulnerability, but I found that there's beauty in vulnerability, and a community will really embrace that because when you take action on their thoughts, and especially the ones that rise to the top, then their thoughts matter, and they have a voice, and they're able to say that not only the superintendent, but the board of trustees are taking action on what we believe as a community is important, and it ultimately benefits our students. And then you get traction, and you build synergy across the community. So I'll say to anybody in the audience, if you're sitting there thinking, well, there is a high level of vulnerability, I will say that it will work in your favor, and Thought Exchange is a perfect solution to make that happen.
So the topic was about the use of the internet in order to get the feedback. One of the things that makes this powerful is that it is also reflective of whatever's happening in technology. You know, everybody has their cell phones. Students have cell phones, the parents all have cell phones. So when you interact, it's done through the cell phone. And it can be done almost, it doesn't take a lot of time. A couple minutes, you're weighed in, you've done your thing. You get back an opportunity to okay, so here's what everybody else said. What are the ones that rise to the top for you? And so it increased participation because it was done through, through your cell phone.
That's great. So I guess something that I always feel that these sort of panel conversations are most valuable if there's a takeaway that is maybe a little bit of an aha that comes from the outside. So there's one thing that I want to challenge you on, which is, we've been doing this now for just about 8 years. There's one fear people have. If we open the gates, won't it be overwhelmingly negative? And I can stand, if there's one thing I can make a stand for, is that actually the shocking majority of people out there are overwhelmingly positive about public education. And the people that you're hearing from are the people that are willing to go on Facebook and put their name behind it. And I always ask this question, how many friends do you have in your life personally that if your mayor said something, they would go on Facebook and they would call down the mayor using their name on Facebook so people know it was them who said it? The answer is usually, I have one cousin. That's about all I can picture, is one cousin who would do that. Because you know what? Most people I know are kind of in support, or they have more balanced things to say. And so there is this big myth that out there the public is overwhelmingly negative. And I just want to debunk that a little bit by saying, actually, the tools that we have, one, the town hall meeting, board meeting, it is an extroversion tool. It is meant for people that prefer the soapbox. Online, there's an online extroversion. It's not the extrovert you meet, but it actually subscribes to them. Here's an interesting idea, though, is that when Reddit or Facebook, any comment that gets, you can upvote on Reddit, and there's lots of things where you can upvote, you can like something so it gets more. Whenever you have a forum conversation on the internet, the first 5 comments have a 90% or higher chance of being in the top 10, regardless if there's 10,000 comments after that. Right? So on Reddit, the first comments that come in are the ones that will be upvoted to the top because they were the first ones that got there. So what happens is that's a lot of the way that you're seeing the internet right now. Somebody comments on Facebook, and all the people around them that agree with them jump in and they start supporting, and the people that agree with them have the same extroversion bias. There's a world of authentic conversation that lives behind that. So I just want to have a closing comment from these people around, what does it mean to actually adopt an authentic, I'm willing to listen point of view as a learning leader. I'm willing to be totally vulnerable. I love the beauty in vulnerability. Maybe just wrap up with a comment like that.
Steve, you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. I think there are very few tools, at least in my experience. I've been in education 30 years now. I hate saying that. But there are very few tools that I think are going to really be an assist to a superintendent or to a CEO of a large, educational organization. And Thought Exchange is that only because I call it the anti-social media. where social media is reflective of, you get the naysayers, and if they are at the top, that's kind of what reverberates. The naysayers, through a thought exchange, they try, they put their ideas out there, but they just don't get the support, and so they kind of fall away. And so the meaningful pieces are what rises to the top.
And I can just say it's benefited our district tremendously. So if you're interested in being vulnerable and getting out there and communicating with your community, this is a perfect platform.
And with 1 second, I'll just say vulnerability without the emotionalism attached to it is really powerful.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone, for doing that. Thanks for listening to that, and I hope there was some value for you in that. Appreciate it.